Okay, the recording has started, so I'm going to turn it over to Marcia.
All righty. Well, good morning. My name is Marcia Malone Ray, and I'm a help desk at the SUNY Online. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Open Education Week webinar. We are pleased to host Dr. Krista Quinn and Kristen Kolka from Stony Brook University to share about student perceptions of digital reading. Dr. Krista Quinn is an instructor of English and an academic coach at Rockland Community College. With over 20 years of teaching experience, Krista has also extensive experience teaching English at the high school level, as well as supervisory experience in the high school setting. Krista is passionate about teaching developmental writing courses at community college, and her research interest areas include strategies for improving persistence and retention in first-year courses at community college, as well as increasing students' feelings of mattering in the community college classroom. Kristen Kolka has been teaching mathematics at Rockland Community College since 2010 and previously worked as a high school mathematics teacher for 3 years. She teaches a variety of math courses both in person and asynchronously. Kristen is also a mentor for the RCC Honors Program. Welcome, Krista and Kristen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Marcia, for introducing us.
Sure.
Marcia said, my name is Krista Quinn. I'm an English teacher here at RCC. And my colleague, Kristen Kolka, is a math teacher at RCC. And we are going to talk to you a little bit about student perceptions of digital reading, which is a grant project that we've been working on for the past several months. And you're probably wondering what in the world do an English teacher and a math teacher both have to do with digital reading, but hopefully that will become clear as we kind of go through. So, Kristen, did you want to say any introductions before we get started?
Oh, no, they read the introduction, so I'm okay. I think you covered it. Thank you.
So today I'm going to take us through a little bit about digital reading versus print reading first, and then Kristen is going to talk to you all about the project that we're doing and our findings from our project, and then we'll kind of wrap it up at the end with where should we go from here. So to begin, as we know, in this ever-increasing digital world, students are being asked to read digitally much more often than ever before. We do see print texts on the decline, and whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think the research is still trying to figure out exactly what's going on. But the thing that we kind of realized here at RCC is that we do need to help students read in the digital realm. When we thought and we talked to our colleagues and our students about digital reading versus print reading, what you see on your screen now are some of the thoughts that they kind of shared with us. What did they think about digital reading versus print reading? So the left-hand column with the blue lines, you'll see, those are some general thoughts that students and teachers alike seem to have about digital reading. The bullet points on the right-hand side of your screen are some thoughts about print reading. So in general, when we talked to people, we found out that when we read digitally, we tend to feel like we are reading more quickly, we're skimming, we're not really doing deep reading. When we're skimming, we're kind of looking for keywords. If we're reading an article with a particular idea in mind, we're looking for those ideas to kind of quickly scan and get through whatever it is that we're reading. So like I said, browsing and scanning, keyword spotting. We've noticed that when students read things digitally, they were reading things once. They would just skim through it once quickly and feel like they read it and that they would move on. They were really reading for main ideas, not doing some of that, deeper digging and thinking about what they were reading. A lot of our colleagues and our students pointed out that the layouts vary when reading digitally. So in other words, if we're reading, on a website, sometimes we have pop-up ads or crawls at the bottom of the screen or photos that are not necessarily about the thing that we're reading. So those varying layouts can present problems for students, or they're simply also noticing the fact that the layouts for digital reading, digital text really vary. A lot of people talked to us about nonlinear reading as well. So a lot of jumping around, starting at the beginning, scrolling your screen, your mouse, your phone down to the last paragraph, then realizing you missed something and scrolling back up to the beginning. So not necessarily starting at the beginning and reading paragraph through paragraph and coming to the end. A lot of jumping around and nonlinear reading. And then finally, when it comes to digital reading, we had a lot of discussions about students and professors alike using fewer strategies. So we notice that people tend to not take notes when they're reading digitally, to not stop and look up a word that they don't know, to kind of just skim and blow by it. When we think about print reading, though, I think that many people would say that they do read more slowly, they do read more deeply. Whether or not it's true, they tend to feel like they are concentrating more when they are reading print versus digitally. Doing those deeper readings, maybe multiple readings, meaning they're reading, they're rereading if they don't understand, they're noticing more details. One thing that is definitely consistent is the layout. Print reading tends to be paragraphs. There's not often so many pictures when we get to college level print reading. The layout is more consistent. It's usually more what students are comfortable with or familiar with. They do tend to read straight through more linearly. Start at the beginning, read each paragraph, and end at the end. And some of our students and colleagues said that they enjoyed the tangibleness, like actually having a textbook or a piece of paper, with them, like they could actually hold on to. So when we thought about all of these differences between the way we feel and the things that we do when we read digitally versus when we read in print, my colleagues and I that were involved in this project did a lot of research on e-texts versus print texts just to see what is the research saying. So I think the interesting thing is that there is varying and disparate findings. There's not one clear answer here that, yes, print reading is better, no, digital reading is not great. Or yes, digital reading is great and we don't need print at all. There was no clear-cut answer. But some of the research does really point to a comprehension gap. It does seem like when students are reading digitally, they are not comprehending as much as when they are reading in print. That could be for a variety of reasons, some of which I'll get into in a little while. But again, some research does show that there's a comprehension gap. The second bullet point here says that a study on the relationship between leisure digital reading habits and text comprehension suggests that comprehension is 6 to 8 times better with physical books than e-readers. Again, they are talking about leisure reading, so reading for pleasure, whereas reading for academic purposes is, definitely a different thing. But it is a little bit alarming to think that if students are being asked to read digitally, that maybe they're not comprehending as much, that could be a problem or a challenge for our students. A little bit more about the research on e-text versus print text. It said on the left-hand side, a 2023 study said that students who are skilled in print reading had strong recall and comprehension across all mediums, but those who are not strong readers or who maybe lack reading strategies had some trouble reading e-texts. So it does seem like there is the potential for e-text to be more challenging for our students. But then, of course, another study found that there was no clear difference between print-based texts and e-text where learner comprehension is concerned. So where does that leave us? I think with a big question mark. And the one thing that we really noticed my colleagues and I realized is that there is a difference reading print versus e-text. And as professors, we needed to do more to ensure that our students were interacting with e-texts the same way that they are interacting with print texts, just to kind of combat some of those challenges or think about it. Think about how our students are, dealing with those challenges. I don't want to sound, negative. Obviously, in an OER world, one of the things that is really amazing is the fact that we can read all of these OER texts digitally, and we can do there are a lot of benefits to digital reading. So I wanted to make sure to include some of the great things about digital reading. The ability to read in the dark. I do think we see a lot of students doing that, right? They're able to be on their phones to do some of their digital reading. They are able to access them in the dark, or when other people are doing things around them, they can always, have access to their texts. It is really easy to find quick information. Sometimes those layouts that we talked about earlier, which can be a little bit challenging, can also be great on the flip side. It's easy to find quick information if we have bold text or if we have hyperlinks. Hyperlinks can lead us to even more, finding of information. As an English teacher who loves books, I actually really love the third one here, saving paper, because I am the first one to kill a lot of trees for my students. So the saving of paper is also a wonderful benefit of digital reading. Some students really enjoy the fact, and some people really enjoy the fact that they can multitask while reading, which may also contribute to the lack of comprehension. If we're, kind of jumping around, it might lead to, a more shallow reading, but that is a benefit, is that we can multitask while we're reading. And like I kind of alluded to earlier, perhaps the best thing or the most important benefit is that it's easy to access these materials. My students love that I am able to post all of our OER open texts right on D2L, and they can access them from wherever they are, on their phone, on their tablet, on their computer. They're not carrying around a heavy textbook, and with many of their responsibilities, whether it's children or family responsibilities, work responsibilities, if they have a 20-minute break at work, they will jump on and read something on their phone without having to carry a textbook to work or, put it in their car or whatever it is. So the ease of access to materials is definitely one of the huge benefits, I think, of digital reading. Students' perceptions about digital reading is largely what our studies and our research project that we're working on this semester is focused on. And Kristen will tell you a lot about what exactly is going on at RCC. But in a more general sense, some of the research has shown that students do have a strong preference have in the past had a strong preference for print-based text, but that might be just due to the fact that that's what they're used to. Many of our students have had textbooks in their K-12 education, and that's just what they know. They're simply not as used to e-texts, and they might perceive themselves as being better readers on print simply because it's what they're used to. So we do want to keep that in mind, that if we are able to give our students strategies for digital reading and really focus on it, then their comfort level will go up, and then their preferences might change. And then lastly, using a student's preferred platform for learning, though, the research says that even if we do what they think they prefer, so even if we give them all print texts, it doesn't necessarily always mean that the comprehension is increased. So again, I think that leads us all back to this idea that we are reading digitally. It may be more challenging for some students, but there is a lot that we can do to help students when they are reading digitally to be more successful and to really kind of dig deep into e-texts. So Kristen is going to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing here.
Right. So basically what our grant went through was Dr. Rachel Kraushard did some research on this, and when we got the grant, what we did was our first task was for 3 of us on it to be trained by Rachel. So we had a few meetings where she gave us some strategies for reading digitally, such as how to highlight and annotate digitally, things like reading aloud, all different strategies that we can use. I think one of the interesting things was, and I can't remember if it was myself and you, Krista, if it was Talia. I think it was Talia, one of the others on the grant, was when we first did the training, Rachel had us print out some, I'm sorry, she gave us some articles in each of our disciplines to read. And several of us actually printed it out to annotate it, which we thought was kind of amusing because our first instinct was to actually print it and make it into print material. And then I had mine sitting in front of me with all the notes I wrote on it, and I never even considered reading it on my computer screen. And it hadn't really occurred to me at the time that I honestly really have no skills when it comes to actually taking an article that I'm reading online and trying to annotate it, which I did with my pen and paper. So this was something she went through with us, and we could see one of the big things she said was our own biases on digital text. And I think it was very apparent that we all also prefer print for the most part, because like you said, Krista, that's what we're used to. So, and I started to think of things that I'm doing in my own classes that probably bias the students against the digital text as well. Just certain things that I say, which are, okay, we're using an OER text, it's online. But you can print it out if you want to. I know I have to have things in print, and I'll say things like that. And I think it's just things like that that make the suggestion to the students that it's harder to read it digitally. So it's just kind of an interesting thing from when we started. So as Rachel was training us, we each chose a class to train them with these same strategies. And we wanted to see basically how their perceptions how their skills and their perceptions to the digital reading were impacted once we maybe actually identified some strategies that they could use for the digital reading. Because if we were all the same way, where we said we didn't even maybe realize that we didn't have those skills when it came to reading digitally, the students probably don't either. So if you could go to the next slide, sorry about that. So at the beginning, we gave them a pre-reading survey, which we all also took. So there was 4 of us that worked together, and we also took the same, basically the same pre-reading survey. And what we had definitely seen was in the pre-reading surveys, there was definitely, we asked them questions like how often do they read for pleasure, or for school or work, what types of materials they like to use. And we could definitely see, in terms of their leisure reading, it was overwhelmingly print that they selected. They were allowed to select more than one in these, and some of them did say different kinds, but it was definitely overwhelmingly print there. And then for non-educational, also the same thing, they preferred to use print. It definitely seemed that way. However, when we discussed it more, it definitely seemed as if they said they prefer the print, but they wanted the digital for the cost savings. So they were willing to take the digital materials that were free, even though they recognized the fact that they would rather have a hard copy book. They didn't want to have to pay for the hard copy book. So it was definitely showed how it was needed to address this, because so many more people are going to digital formats, even if it's not, like for myself, I have one class where I don't use an OER textbook, but it is an ebook that they purchase for the most part. They can purchase the print book, but just cost reasons, nobody ever does. So we could definitely see that they wanted a print book, but they were going to take the digital book because it was cheaper or free completely. So, and we could see same thing for the pleasure reading. It was pretty much overwhelmingly hard copy, although some did say print. One thing that we definitely saw was an overwhelming response as to when they're reading with print. Most people said they get more distracted while reading digitally. They did identify that. There was a good portion that said it was the same, and very few people pretty much said that it was less distraction digitally. So the students themselves were able to identify that the digital reading with themselves as well was not their preference. Despite the fact that I know myself, I've always assumed that the students would prefer the digital because that's what they've always been used to. But even the students who have grown up in a digital world still prefer the print materials, according to what we saw with our surveys. So if you could go to the next slide, which is just the end. So at the end for to address the English, math, and speech in terms of the numbers, they were all pretty similar in terms of, even though the disciplines were so different. At the end, we were seeing definitely a shift in students. We asked a question regarding, sorry, I'm just looking for regarding how they felt in terms of just their perceptions of digital materials after going through the training. And there was definitely a shift in students saying that they feel more confident. At least there was 2 categories that we saw big portions of, where they said they were confident that they could read effectively in that mode, or at least they felt better than they did before. They had some more tools that they were able to use. In terms of the differences, again, between the disciplines, there was definitely, so as Krista mentioned earlier, it seems probably a little weird that we have an English and a math professor talking about digital reading. I would say from my perspective, for the math part of it, I think for the things that I'm asking them to read, I'm asking them to read things like statistics, word problems. And I think in general, those students are struggling with their comprehension, whether it's in print or digital. So I think a lot of the strategies I've always had them use are underlining certain things in the problem, reading it. I've always encouraged them to read it out loud. But what I had to extend that to was to start to extend it to, now, how do you do this when you're reading it on your homework, which is on a screen, which I think they did find somewhat helpful. A lot of the strategies definitely that were able to be used in the English and the speech classes were not quite as applicable in a math course. That was something that was definitely a totally different perspective. This semester, we are each training a person in another discipline, and I'm training a science person for where many of these strategies are a lot more applicable to even that discipline because they're doing a lot more reading. So they're doing strategies like Cornell notes, again, like reading aloud, things like that. In terms of the Cornell notes and things like that, I'm not really having them extract a lot of main ideas. So in that sense, it was a little different for me. But I felt that from seeing the surveys and from speaking with other colleagues, that the perceptions of the digital reading did improve. I mean, I think for the most part, there were definitely some students who still said they preferred the print materials, but they at least felt a little bit better equipped to handle the digital materials that they were looking at. Again, they still want the free materials, and I think they felt a little bit better equipped to read those, particularly definitely, again, in the English and the speech areas. Like I said, with the math, the one thing that we were sort of realizing there was the students kind of need help with their reading comprehension in the math either way, sort of. And it's kind of the similar problem that they're experiencing either way. But I think they were finding it a little bit more challenging to then also do that when it's on their computer screen and they can't really write on it. So definitely interesting the differences there, but there was definitely similarities in the sense that the students kind of did seem to still prefer the print either way. Is there anything I missed there, Krista, that you might have added in that I might have forgotten there?
No, I think that was a great point though about the math, the reading comprehension really just kind of playing into it.
Yeah, and it was definitely interesting because I chose a statistics class, honestly, really, because that was my only in-person class that I had that had an OER textbook. I kind of had no choice. And then I realized that one was a good one to choose because there is definitely significantly more reading there. I really, at this point, haven't, I'm doing it again also in a statistics class this semester because it just happens to also be mostly what I teach. But for the other calculus and college algebra courses, I haven't fully decided on how I would really implement this there because they're not really doing a ton of reading. And again, they're reading an equation off the screen. And I think either way, at that point, they're writing. So it's kind of like, that's one of the things we always said, even no matter what they're doing, they have to copy the problem and do it. There's kind of really no other way for them to do it. Whereas with statistics, you're not copying an entire word problem. So it was a little bit more applicable. The one thing I know I had with my results with the perceptions is I couldn't fully make my response rate on the surveys were not as good because I did choose an honors class into which I had a lot of early admit students who are still in high school and they weren't 18 and weren't allowed to take the survey. So in terms of their actual perceptions, I'm basing definitely a little bit more on talking to them than I am on the official surveys because they weren't technically allowed to take it. But it did seem to be effective to actually identify it. Even if it's just that they're more aware of it. I found that with myself as well, that the second I never identified the fact that I didn't like to read online until I started this grant. And then I was like, I printed out the articles. I realized how like averse I was to reading on it as well. So if I missed anything there, Krista, let me.
Did my screen just stop viewing like the full screen?
Yeah.
Okay, let me, I'm having, my computer is not being great right this minute. There we go. The only other thing that I wanted to add is that, Kristen, you reminded me. So interestingly, I chose to do some of our methods and this study last semester in my English 101 class, which was an online synchronous class. So, students log in at the same time 2 days a week, and we're on Zoom, just like we are now. And what I found really interesting is that in the pre-surveys for my class, many students did not prefer digital reading, despite the fact that they did choose a fully online synchronous course. So I thought that was really interesting that students keep saying or keep telling us, what we found here is that they keep telling us they don't want to read digitally, but they're making choices to read digitally. And like Kristen said, one of those big choices that we realized was money. They don't want to spend the money. They'd rather have the free text, even if it does mean that it's digital, even if it does mean that they don't love digital. So there's like a lot of factors coming into play. And I think it just kind of strengthened for all of us involved in this English, math, and our colleague in speech that regardless of their feelings, we need to train them because we are using digital text. So these methods that we've been giving them are important because whether they like it or don't, it is being used. And, they kind of need those strategies.
Right. And I think one of the things with our own biases as well is I think we're guilty of, number one, admitting that we all like our print textbooks. I mean, I think you can see one of my bookshelves with all my textbooks that I refuse to get rid of. Like, I grew up with print. I want my print textbooks. And I know I'm guilty of assuming that the younger people want the digital stuff because they grew up with it. And I think I've assumed that. I've always assumed that. And I think we're starting to see here that that's not really the case. And maybe it is from us kind of imparting our own biases onto them. Or maybe it is just that it is more natural to read for all of the reasons we listed on print. And we've gone through this whole thing where we've just sort of transitioned them to digital reading and not really given them any tools to kind of figure out how to do that a little bit better. I know I'm definitely guilty of it. I put everything online and then I said, here you go. And I assumed they already knew how to do everything because they've been reading things online. They've had online textbooks before, whereas like I never did. So it's just kind of an interesting thing that I actually learned a lot about myself and my own preferences and my own assumptions that I've made for students on their behalf that they didn't necessarily feel. And now I think just the fact that I've identified it a little bit makes me able to help them a little bit better as well, just because I'm now not assuming that they can just do everything perfectly online that I give them. So just an interesting perspective once you actually identify it.
It's so true. It's such a great point. I think I don't know, Kristen, I agree with you. I make assumptions that all of my students prefer digital because most of them have grown up that way, but I think we all really realize that's not necessarily the case.
Right. And it's kind of at the same time, we're also identifying that they're very distracted and they have no attention. And it's like, for some reason, I just never put the two together that maybe they're really not comprehending what they're reading online. It's an interesting kind of thing once you actually identify it. So
definitely. I'm going to go to the next slide. My computer is so Kristen kind of talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to make sure we had a slide so that anybody here who's looking to know like exactly what did we do with these strategies that we keep talking about. We learned from Dr. Rachel Kraushauer that there are a lot of different ways that we can kind of help students comprehend better when they are reading texts digitally, but we focused on 3 particular strategies to help students engage with any of the digital materials. And like Kristen said, there were a little difference for her in math than there were for those of us that were in the humanities. So myself I teach English. Dr. Kraushauer teaches English as well. And then our other colleague teaches Speech 101 Communication Studies. So what we did on our side is we focused on students when they were reading digitally, we asked them to take notes on paper. And I say on paper kind of in quotation marks almost because I know for myself, when I asked my students to take notes on the digital texts that they were reading, I provided them with a note-taking sheet using the Cornell note-taking format. But then, of course, because it was an online course, students could choose how they wanted to utilize the Cornell note sheet. They could print it out and have it in front of them and read the article or the homework reading and then take notes on the Cornell note sheet using a pen. Or, and I've seen my students do this several times, they would have the article open on one half of their computer screen and the Cornell note-taking sheet open on the other half of their screen. And they would read the article digitally and then they would take notes, using Word or Google Docs or whatever word processing tool we wanted to use. But some of the research shows that the act of note-taking, regardless of how it happens, is what can help with comprehension. So again, we focused on, the Cornell note-taking and students could choose which way. In my class, my students, there was a mix of more traditional age college students, and then there were a couple of adult learners in that class as well. And I did notice, just sort of anecdotally, that the adult learners were printing everything out and taking notes on the paper, whereas the other students who were maybe more traditional college age students were still taking the notes, but they were the ones who were more likely to have the article open on half of their screen and the Cornell notes on the other half and type their notes. The other thing that we focused on is social annotation and also just digital annotation in my class in particular. So there are some social annotation tools where students can all engage with the same text together as a class. They can highlight, they can write their notes and their reactions, and then they can kind of talk to their peers in the class and have these sort of digital conversations about the article they were reading. So I did try that with my students, some digital social annotation tools. Of course, the app is escaping the name of it is escaping me right this second. It will come back to me though. My students didn't love the social aspect of it. They didn't mind digitally annotating, but they much preferred when we used Google Docs to digitally annotate. So in that instance, what I would do is I would take the reading assignment and put it into a Google Doc, share the link with everyone. Students would then make a copy of the reading and they would use the comment function to put their own annotations on the side column of the Google Doc. And then they would use, the computer highlighting tool to highlight, to underline, to make things bold. They much preferred that aspect of digital annotation. They didn't really enjoy when there was one file for the whole class to talk to. But I do think that was just, a preference. I've had other classes in the past who really enjoyed the social aspect of it, being able to talk to their peers, talk to them, on the actual text itself, about the text. And then lastly, we did focus on reading aloud. As an English teacher, it does sound kind of crazy, but I will stand by this until the end of time. I often read aloud to my students. If they have a long homework assignment, I will never read the whole thing to them, but I often read the first 2 paragraphs just to get them engaged in what it is that we're reading, and so that they can hear my fluency, when I read challenging texts aloud to them. So in my class, that's something that I always do, but I did heavily focus on it when we were doing this project, is reading out loud to my students. And then one thing that there are plenty of tools that will read things to you, but I think the best one is Microsoft Edge. The browser has a tool built into it that it will read things to you from your screen. So I did recommend that to my students to see it, and offered that if they wanted to have their texts read to them. There are some apps that students pay for, and in the past I've had students who did pay for apps to have the texts read to them, and then they would kind of like follow along on paper. But if we're talking about comprehension, I think that's a great strategy. Anything that is multiple modes of learning, not just visual, but also auditory, can just help, strengthen students' kind of comprehension and understanding.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that that was one commonality I had, and that was something that I do all the time as well. I rarely ever give a problem to a class and don't read it out loud to them first. I had never thought to have them specifically do it themselves as well, and that was something I'll start incorporating a little bit more, where you read it out loud and then you have them read it out loud. I hadn't thought to have them do that. I can't really comment on the effectiveness of that yet because I haven't tried it enough. But I do think the reading aloud for any discipline would definitely be applicable. That was where the math was so different in so many of those things, but I think that one was one where it definitely aligned pretty well.
Kristen, not to put you on the spot, but were there any tools that I didn't list here that you found really helpful for math?
Not as much for me, because again, it's just mine was just so different. Like I really couldn't use the Cornell notes, although, because again, it just doesn't really apply to what I was doing. But I mean, for myself, like, I can't say that I wasn't doing anything like that. I did have a lot of students kind of do the same thing like you, Krista, where I have a lot more students now. If I look through my classes, I've had a dramatic increase in students who take their notes on a tablet. And I think it's probably, maybe I'm seeing that more because that's actually how I display their notes. So I have my own that I write it and I connect it to the projector, and they have access to the notebook. So I think they are in a kind of kind of a way sort of doing that that Cornell note-taking type of strategy, because a lot of them are keeping my notes half on their screen and then they're keeping their own notes on the other half and they're trying to do a problem. So I think it's still transferable skills, but I don't, in terms of like the actual like social annotation tools, I just don't have many places where I would be able to use those. So I'm a little bit unfamiliar with a lot of the apps out there, just because I just don't really have a lot of places where I can use them, particularly in mine. They're mostly doing word problems and doing other types of problems, and not is so much reading in my classes. So I just, unfortunately, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other ones that you might have met. And I certainly don't think that I have any other ones necessarily. The one thing that I use for my notes is I do use Microsoft OneNote, which is a shareable one. So I guess that probably counts on that as well, because it's a shareable class notebook. I don't allow them to write on it. I just allow them to open it up and look at it. But I think, I guess that sort of goes along with it. I hadn't really thought of that until just now. But other than that, I can't think of anything else.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that you're using a tablet and you see students using a tablet, because that's a little bit of to me, the best of both worlds, right? Like they're doing digitally, but they're still handwriting it. So
Yes.
it kind of combines all of these things. I hadn't thought about that till you just said it, but that's like a great like way of the future.
Yeah, I think the students, yeah, they do I think appreciate that, because they can open the notes that I'm writing on the board on their computers. And I see a lot of them now get like bigger iPad screens, and they'll have my notes on the left half and their own blank like PDF that they're writing on the right half, and then they can kind of scroll through while they're writing to look at things to try to figure out problems. It's really, really cool.
That it is
So,
really cool. I love
yeah,
that. Little
I would have
evolved.
benefited from that a lot as a student, I think.
Me too, so that you're
Yeah,
not flipping through pages of a notebook, or you lost
yeah,
it, or like you bring the wrong notebook to class in the olden days, or
yep, yeah. Or you don't write everything down in time, or you get too distracted by writing things down while they're being written on the board. It's pretty cool.
I just wanted to add to, I was Googling while Kristen was talking, the social annotation tool, the one that I've used several times with varying levels of success, kind of depending on the students, not necessarily the tool, is Hypothesis. It allows you to upload PDFs of whatever the reading assignment is. And then, like I said, students can go in together as a class and they can all annotate the same article, and they can start side conversations in the side of the app. So for an English class, like I said, I've had varying levels of interest with students. Some of them don't want to see everybody else's notes. Some of them like to be able to see everybody else's ideas, but it is definitely something worth trying, I think, if you're so interested. And Kristen, what you were saying, I'm actually wondering if there's a way I love that you have your class notebook on OneNote. I wonder if there's a way to make it like a copy of it that students can question.
Yeah, I haven't explored it too much, but there definitely is a way where they can annotate it and they can write in it as well. I think it's just one of those settings where it's like people with the link can edit, I think is all you have to put. It's like that same Microsoft like setup there. I believe if you put that they can edit, they can go in and I don't know if you can, I'd have to look into it a little bit more. I don't know if you can make it like certain pages they can and certain ones they can't. I'm not too sure on that one, but I would bet you probably can do that.
Yeah, that might be cool to try in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to how are we doing on time? We've got 5 more minutes. So what's next? Just kind of to sum it up, digital text and open education resources are definitely integral to academic and professional environments. We love SUNY's commitment to OER, which is why we were so interested in doing this project, because OER is a great thing. It's an equalizer in a lot of ways, but students definitely need, as our study kind of showed, this project, that they need the strategies. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention when we were on the previous slide, and as I'm talking, it just reminded me. Kristen, remember Talia shared, so one of our colleagues who was the member of the speech department, she really prioritized the Cornell notes in her class, and she noticed that the students who did the Cornell notes and used the Cornell notes did better on an exam than the students who didn't. So again, the texts in her class were all OER and digital texts. Some students did their Cornell notes a little bit more, a little better, I guess, than others. And she did notice a difference on test scores. So again, I think it's important that we give our students these strategies, because it really is showing that it will help them with, all kinds of comprehension. So at RCC, Kristen mentioned this earlier as well. We were trained in the fall by Dr. Rachel Krashauer, and right now, Kristen, myself, Rachel, and our other colleague Talia, we each have like a buddy in another department that we are training, and they are then training their students. So by the end of our project, we will have 8 classes of students, about 20 to 25 students in each, who will be trained in some of these digital reading strategies. And then we do hope to offer workshops faculty-wide here at RCC to train more faculty so that they can then train their students, so that students are, better digital readers, that they're comprehending more. And then at the bottom here, we are in a position to be pioneers in digital pedagogy by spearheading innovation and transformation in the field of digital teaching and learning practices. That's really our goal, is to help students use the things that we're giving them in a way that helps make their learning deeper and better, and reduce the challenges for them. Kristen, any final words?
Not that I can think of. Yeah, I think we pretty much hit everything.
Sounds good. I'm going to stop sharing. All right, there we go.
I'm just going to jump in real quick and invite questions. Either, feel free to unmute yourselves or pop it in the chat if you're more comfortable. I just want to say thank you for kind of raising our awareness. It's not necessarily something I thought about what my own perceptions are that I might impose on my students, right? So kind of inadvertently. So that was really good to think about and kind of reflect on how we interact with the digital and the print. I think most of the comparisons on that first slide were pretty dead accurate for me. I'm like, yep, when I'm digital, I do this, and when I'm print, I do this. And I am a former English teacher, so I get the wanting to hold the book. Like I'm very tangible in what I read, even for leisure. So it's interesting.
Jamie had put in the chat before that it's nice to give students the option free or lower cost digital and the option to print or purchase. We are really noticing here at RCC, Kristen, I think you probably agree that the students don't buy it. They don't print it out on their own. If we are not giving it to them, they are going to just take the digital. Do you have the same in math?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I don't end up using the textbook as much because I end up using just our regular online homework, and that's not attached to the textbook. But same, I mean, I don't see. For a while I gave, okay, here when I first started using OER, I said here's the link to the textbook. Here's a link to where you can purchase one. I never saw a single student ever order it, and it wasn't even that expensive. It was like less than $20, but they still did not want it. Nobody asked, nobody printed it out. They didn't want to pay us. If they could pay $0 for the book, that's what they wanted to pay.
100% same here. So we've definitely something we've thought of, and we have an OER committee here that we talk about, and they just don't. So we're really kind of shows the importance of all the things that we're doing,
Yep.
I think that's it. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Oh, Erin, you're on mute still.
I'm a rookie at this, right?
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, we will post the slides with the recording.
Yep. So thank you for participation in today's webinar, and thank you to our speakers for sharing today. Erin posted the where the videos can be found. But the full schedule of events happening this week, along with the link to register, can be found at the OEW link. Recordings will be posted on the SUNY Online Videos YouTube channel. SUNY Open Ed Week is featured on Open Ed Global. Check out events this week from around the globe. And that link I will pop into the chat. And we hope to see you at another Open Ed session this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.